So before we get into changing the control of our program, I'd like to show you guys something that really helps in Visual Studio is that you can run your program in what's called interactive debug mode. And interactive debug mode has a couple advantages over running it in release mode while you're developing. So I will say to start, unfortunately my Windows machine is not working right now. The mic is not working. So I had to create this in a Mac. So I'll try to explain the differences of what you would do on the Windows machine or the Windows version of Visual Studio as I go. But the two advantages running your code in debug mode as opposed to release is that one, we can actually run our program step by step. So instead of just running from start to finish and seeing the output, we can actually watch as each line of code runs. So when we start to change from sequential control to selection control with if statements or switch statements, or repetition with while loops or for loops, we can actually watch what happens with each statement and really learn what's happening. So it helps to debug program if there's something that you think might be wrong. But it also is a great learning tool just to watch each statement go as you're running the program. Okay, so first let's look at how to run your program in interactive debug mode. And there's really three ways in the Windows version of Visual Studio. I'll show you two ways on the Mac. So the first way on the Windows machine, if you click on Run, you can simply just click Step Into, and that'll just start the program, and you'll be stepping line by line through it. The second way is to add a breakpoint. So we're going to just go over to the gutter here. It's the same thing in Windows. Just click around in the gutters until you get one to show up. But if we click in the gutter here, you can see it says Insert Breakpoint. You're going to see a solid bullet on the Windows machine, and you can see this bullet icon shows up on the Mac version. I can right-click on that and disable it if I want to maybe set a point in my program that I want to pause it at later on and come back to. So we can disable it. It'll leave it there, but then we can reuse it later. We can also remove the breakpoint or delete the breakpoint at this point. You can click on the breakpoint to make it show up, to delete it, remove it, or add it. Okay, then I'm going to run it in interactive debug mode just by clicking that Run button. And when we do that, you'll see this debug menu appear. And there's three functions. These are the same on the Windows machine. Step over, step into, and step out. And step over and step out are going to make a lot more sense once we cover methods a little bit later on. At this point, step into is all you need. And you can see what happens. It highlights a line of code or one statement in your code. And after you hit the step into, it's going to run that line of code. So now we're highlighting line 10. And if we toggle over to the output window, you can see it's run that first statement, which output statement 1. If I click step into again, you see the output statement 2. And again, it's pausing at this line that this is the next statement that's going to run as soon as we hit step into. On a Windows machine, you can actually just hit F11 and keep tapping F11 as you work through the code. The one thing to remember is you're going to have to toggle back and forth between the editor and the output window. You can do that with Alt-Tab on Windows or Command-Tab on a Mac machine. So Alt-Tab, just hold down the Alt and tap Tab to toggle back and forth between the window there. Okay, so that's one way to run it with that breakpoint. Another, a real easy way, this is one of my favorites, is find the line of code that you want to pause it at. Right click and select Run to Cursor. And this is exactly the same on the Windows machine. And what's going to happen is it's going to run from the beginning of the program. We know that's the main method in our C# console apps. And it's going to run it up into the point where we right clicked and selected Run to Cursor. So you can see it output statement 1 already. Again, I'm going to go step into. I'm going to run that line of code. and it outputs statement 2. Step into again, and output statement 3. You can always stop a program with this terminate or stop button, and that exists on Windows just the same as it does on the Mac. Okay, so really nice. We can see each line of code running. Well, there's even more to it. Another nice function as you're starting to learn about storage is you can you can actually view what's in memory at the time in terms of the variables that you've created. So here I have, I'm just going to output hello and so now we're outputting hello in the variable name. And I'm going to run to cursor to the point where we create this variable. And I'm going to click step into. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go up to view, paths, and I want to view, debug paths, and I want to view locals. On the Windows machine, this is a little bit different. When you run the program is when this becomes available, and there will actually be a separate item, file menu item that says debug. I think it's right next to a build or project. And if you select the debug menu, then you can find Windows, and then you'll find locals. So debug path locals on the Windows machine against the debug menu, and then Windows is I think the very first option in the menu, and then locals. And this is a really sweet tool to learn from. It is now showing all of the variables that are created and in scope. As we learn about scope at this point in the program, it shows it here at the bottom. So we've got this parameter. This is a standard argument that's can be sent in when we run the program at the command prompt. Don't need to worry about that for now. And then we're creating this variable called name. So at the moment it's showing name at the bottom here. Whoops. Keep clicking on it, I shouldn't. At the bottom here, we're showing name, and we're showing its type as string. That's kind of nice. It shows the type that we declared it as, and a value. And the current value is null. It has not been assigned a value. As soon as we run this statement, it's going to actually assign the value. You will notice when you're running it in debug mode, if, say, we're on line 9, but you've created 3 more variables below that, it will show the variables in this locals window. And that's because when a compiler runs through it, it does like a first pass. It goes through and it collects everything that's going to be in memory. And then it actually runs the program. And then this is where we actually create it in memory and assign a value to it. So a little different process there. Okay, so as soon as we run this statement, now you'll see the value in the locals window is Steve. So now we can see exactly what's in memory. So a really nice learning tool. It helps us to understand what's going on in memory with our program. It'll be particularly useful as we get into a little more complex code, and it's really going to help us understand scope once we get into methods later on. So try to run your programs as much as possible using interactive debug mode. I love that run to cursor function on the Windows machine. Just go ahead and hit run and step into, or just even hit F11. We'll run it in interactive debug mode, starting at the first line of the main method.